Chairmen, good day.
Hello.
From Tone Town. It's another beautiful day.
Are we
in
at Tone Town?
Yes.
Oh,
the pedals are chirping.
Man.
The amplifiers are warm and bright.
Yep.
And the guitars are resonating.
Fresh strings.
And man, good to be here today. And I can't think of a better topic to discuss as we all are, commencing our day in Tone Town, to talk about the topic of guitar companies. And I'm talking mostly big box guitar companies that have decided to make the departure into doing pedals and accessories, namely pedals. And I'm curious because there seems to be a lot of, I wouldn't say concern, but maybe like a lot of talk around what are the intentions behind such a diversion from sort of their bread and butter, whether it's a guitar company or potentially even amplifier company, and I think, again, not taking this to smaller companies. Certainly there are some small companies that do a mixture of guitar pedals and amplifiers. And we spoke offline about like a company like Milkman. It's not a huge conglomerate. He does make some pedals. He does make some sort of kind of preampy sort of devices. I'm thinking more, if we're talking about an amp company, like a Mesa Boogie, somebody on that level, or as far as guitar makers that are also making pedals, like Gibson with Maestro or Fender with their line of pedals. And maybe we could talk a little bit about Sir. I think that they're kind of on a different platform than either of those companies. They do make pedals, they do make amps, they do make guitars. PRS certainly would fall into that category, I think, as well. And so I'm curious from your perspective about, whether your point of view, or I shouldn't even put too much framing in it, what your point of view is on the idea that these larger companies are getting into pedals. How is it that you view it? Which of you would like to start, Grant or Brian?
Come on, Brian. I vote Brian.
Yeah, I mean, the first company that comes to mind for me is Mesa. Them being such a big amp company and also having pedals, accessory boxes. Before I started here, I actually didn't know that a lot of those companies also did pedals. Like, I knew that they made like the high wire, like
the buffer.
That's right. Yeah, the buffer. So like I knew about those kind of things, but I didn't actually realize that they made pedals. And that's the part that, like, some people are like, oh, they make amps, so they have to make really good pedals. It's not, can't cram an entire amp with all the tubes and everything. And, from experience at an amp shop, there's a lot that goes into a guitar amp. So, but I mean, they have some really, really well made pedals. I don't play any of them, but I've played through a bunch of them. But they seem to be a really, really good pick for their pedals. And are well-rounded, not oversaturated. I don't think they do any modulation pedals. If I'm wrong, correct me if I'm wrong. But yeah, I mean, I would say they're cool. And yeah.
So just to press you a little further on this, Brian, and feel free to do a Houdini-like escape if this is not something that you want to dive into. But thinking about Mesa Boogie, that's one example. When you think about a Fender, or you think about a Gibson with Maestro, for example, and those are kind of other companies that might be on sort of the level of, or a PRS on the level of a Gibson slash Mesa Boogie, since they're the same company now, or under the same umbrella. How do you feel as somebody who's sort of engaging with, the public in not only a retail space through the Guitar Sanctuary, but also in sort of a pedalboard building space? Do you feel like it's a benefit to the customer to have these brands making pedals, or do you feel like this is just sort of a way to expand the empire of those companies? Do you have any sort of sentiment about that?
Yeah, I mean, my first initial thought for a lot of these companies, I think like when Fender approached us about their line of pedals they're coming out with, and the rep came and they showed us the pedals and everything, and we're like, okay, they sound good, and like he left or whatever, and we were like, but why are they making these? What's the reason for them? And immediately someone's like, oh, it's just to further their company, further, like as you said, their empire of options for everything. The issue that you get into when you get every amp company that also makes the guitar effects is there's just so much oversaturation of the market of that exact Tube Screamer that's been made 1,000 times. That is just like it's just enough, and it kind of gets lost. That's where some of these pedals do get lost from some of these companies, is because people don't realize that they make them. But I think it's a big part of them furthering, giving more. It's like oh well, if we come out, we don't want to just come out with this. Like Goodwood, you didn't want to just come out with this one product and only sell this one type of thing. You wanted to come out with extra accessories and other types of boxes and other things to do. And I think that's what it comes down to for amp companies, is they don't want to only be categorized as amp companies and cabinet companies. They also want to be, they are in the effects business through the guitar amps, but like, they, not everyone's going to stick a Marshall head in their rig because they have other like rigs. It's easy to stick a pedal on your board and it's a Mesa or something. So yeah, that's what I would say. I would say it's definitely like a furthering their their accessibility for the brand. That's what it would be.
I want to come back to this with you, Brian, but I also want to just kind of get Grant's initial thoughts on, again, sort of like some of these larger companies sort of moving in to pedals, in sort of what your sort of initial sentiment is about it, and kind of assessing that against your position in the marketplace as a builder and also a manufacturer of pedals and accessories yourself.
Yeah, I think I am all for it. If I was going to summarize my thoughts, I'm all for it. But the caveat in my mind is you have to set your expectations accordingly. You are not going to see a Fender or some other large company transition into a new market with an over-the-top, innovative, or you could also say possibly risky product. So you're not going to typically see them come out with anything new. Or in my mind, I'll just point back to myself. If Fender announces a pedal line, I am not going to be rushing to the store saying like, what new, innovative, never before seen guitar pedal have they come up with? It's just not going to happen. They can't take that kind of risk like a much smaller company who's like, I need to, a smaller company, their biggest thing is I need to be seen by more customers. Fender doesn't need to be seen by more customers. They need to sell more to the same customers. Mm-hmm. And to do that, you kind of need a sure thing. And so you need to come out with an overdrive pedal that's based on a TS9. You need a chorus pedal, maybe a tremolo, a delay. Mm-hmm. You need the kind of predictable stuff, and it needs to be manufactured at a low cost. And so I think my opinion is that they will put out some good stuff, and it'll be at a fair price point, all of which is great for the customer. That's awesome. But I just don't think it's going to be something. I'm not affiliated with Fender at all, so I can say I don't think it's going to be anything all that exciting. But I think it's a great product. Like it's something I would probably use on my board. I think I'd like the sounds of it and all that, but it's nothing to write home about. So that's my overview. That's kind of where I sit with it initially.
Okay. I think that these are good starting points to sort of kind of come from, and I think from the perspective, what I hope from a prospective listener is, again, that this isn't a discouragement or any sort of indictment of any of these brands. I think it's maybe just an exploration of maybe some of what we can perhaps glean as the intents behind some of these products, or at least what it looks like from our perspective in the industry. And that, I suppose that it could come out as looking as some sort of judgment evaluation of these companies. And so I want to be careful to tread lightly as it relates to that, but also sort of, not to use the overused expression, speaking our truth as it relates to these companies without wielding it like a sword, which is often what people do with that saying. So my perspective, just as a kind of a jumping off point, is I think that there is some maybe differentiation, at least in my mind, of maybe how some of these different companies approach it. And one of the things that sort of precipitated this conversation, for me at least, is I had heard, and I don't know that this is true, but one of the words on the street is that Maestro, which is an affiliate of Gibson, in the pedals that they had recently launched in the last year, and they did, a pretty good variety of pedals ranging from overdrives to distortions to modulation devices like phasers and chorus to delays. So a pretty well-rounded offering of products that now they are going to be discontinued. Again, I don't know that this is true, but there has been some talk on social media that this is happening. I can see that in some markets that these products are being blown out for like $100. And so I think that's maybe 30 to 50% less than what they would normally be, and it doesn't appear to be connected to a holiday sale or anything like that. So should that be true, this was sort of like an experiment that ended up being short-lived, and now they're sort of blowing it out. As it relates to Fender, I think that Fender had a really strong initial launch of their products, and I would say of any company that's sort of done this in the last 10 years that kind of is like a large company, I think actually Fender tried to be really thoughtful about what it was that they were making. And I say that in that they hired a lot of really great people to design these products. So a lot of the kind of ghost designers behind some of these devices were people like Bruce Egnater, who is, for those of us who have been in the industry for some time, he's kind of one of the kind of long time, amp builders and designers. He was involved with, the boutique amp distribution products like the Synergy in modules and power amps. He was very involved with that. It was sort of roughly based on a Egnater module based preamp that had come out in I think either the late 80s or early 90s. He has been very involved with a lot of different companies, was the mentor of Dave Friedman and a lot of other people that have kind of come out of that Michigan area. And he was one of the designers of a lot of the stuff that Fender was doing. They had also hired other sort of, established and respected pedal designers and engineers to design different products that they had. And so I thought that Fender actually, even though it was going for more of a budget-based product, they appeared to be well designed, and they really tried to be thoughtful in hiring people that could execute a really expansive pedal line that was going to meet customers at a fair price point for what they were. I think the challenge that we see now, kind of removed a few years from the release of these pedals, is Fender doesn't really have anybody at the helm, because a lot of these people that designed for them were contractors. They weren't in-house people. Some of them were. And it seems as though there isn't like a marketing direction for the pedals because, again, the company is so vast. They have amplifiers, they have accessories, they have guitars, and they have guitars at different levels. They have guitars from Mexico and guitars from Japan and guitars from America, and then they have a custom shop. And so it seems like their resources are kind of dispersed. So they kind of did this initial launch with the pedals, and then there haven't really been any more Fender pedals that have come out in several years. So it's kind of like they kind of released this huge, vast list of pedals that, ranged from analog delay to digital reverb to rotary to buffers and boosts to compressors and overdrives and distortions. And then that was kind of like the big launch. And then that was going to carry them through for, the next 5 years or whatever it is. So it's a little bit different technique than you would see most other companies would employ, because they just probably wouldn't have the resources to not only design that many products, but to do such a concentrated launch and then kind of like turn their backs on it for 5 years and not to ever touch it again. And I think that this is all to say that just like, if it is true that Gibson is already discontinued or is moving toward the discontinuation of Maestro, and Fender kind of does this market flood of new products, and then there isn't really any support. Like an interesting example, just a quick aside of this, and then I want to get into a few of our sponsors quickly, is like they released this power supply when they came out with all their different pedals. There isn't one video on the Fender power supply. There's like if you look on YouTube, there's literally zero information about the power supply, whether it's switch mode or whether it's linear. It happens to be switch mode, if in case you're wondering. And I know there's a lot of people that are interested in it because I've gotten questions about it routinely. There's almost no information about it. There's no video. There's nothing that's sort of unpacking what it is. Like,
but it's kind of just like
they just made a power supply and it's there, Yeah. And so it's just sort of interesting, the approach. Like, I would never dream of putting out a product where there was no information about it, or at least in the multimedia space. So I want to talk more about this, but before we do, I want to mention a few of our sponsors that make the show possible every week. And as I've said in other episodes, by way of supporting our sponsors, that is in turn supporting us. And, they have tracking cookies and things like that, so that they're aware that if you're coming to their link by way of one of our descriptions in YouTube or one of our links in our show notes, that's helpful to them to know that we're actually driving traffic. So if you are interested in any of these, please do at least give them a look and see if it may be something of interest. The first sponsor is our friends over at Guitar Sanctuary. And if you're looking at us on YouTube right now, you'll notice that Brian is in the pedalboard layer of the Guitar Sanctuary, but their actual retail storefront is one of the best in the country. They have an amazing, amazing retail space and really specialize in high-end and boutique guitar gear, pedals, amplifiers, and they have amazing service and really, really amazing products. So I highly recommend that you check out our friends over at the Guitar Sanctuary in McKinney, Texas, a suburb of the Dallas-Fort Worth area. If you happen to be in the area or you are local, go and check them out. They also have a beautiful website where you can research all different pedals and devices, even many of which that we'll be talking about today. Also, I want to mention our friends over at Sweetwater and their new kind of venture, which is the Sweetwater Gear Exchange. And I characterize it as everything that I love about reverb without all the things that I hate about reverb. It is a online marketplace where people like you and me can sell products secondhand, and they are growing their user base every single day. And one of the greatest things that I think is a key differentiator between, say, like a Reverb or an eBay and Sweetwater Gear Exchange, if you are a seller, the fees are really minimal comparatively to those other platforms. But moreover, as a seller, if you decide that you want to take your earnings and put them on a Sweetwater gift card, you don't have to pay any fees at all. And if you're somebody like me that is routinely buying new stuff and using Sweetwater, it's a great way to save money on fees and still have use of that money in, Sweetwater to buy new things that you may be interested in or you're kind of saving up for. So I really appreciate the service. Again, it is like kind of the I think a new and improved version of Reverb, and I'm really excited to see how they grow it. And it's a really amazing service. I've already used it a few times to sell some used gear, and I've actually bought some gear on there as well. And it's been a really, really great experience. So highly recommend Sweetwater Gear Exchange. You can check that out at sweetwater.com/used. All right. So back to guitar companies that are moving into the pedal space. I think we all kind of briefly touched on kind of what our starting points are. Given that we've now all heard from each other, let's maybe first identify kind of the companies that we sort of see in sort of these bigger box brands that are producing pedals or have produced pedals that are sort of on the level of, we've kind of focused primarily on Gibson and Maestro, and I guess as an extension that also Mesa Boogie. Those are all under the same umbrella. We talked about Fender. What are some of the other ones? Maybe we can just kind of popcorn this thing. Grant and Brian, other companies that sort of fall into this that have also been making pedals or have made pedals in the past that are kind of in this category.
Sir?
So Sir, yeah, I would say Sir, and they're certainly smaller than these other companies. Who else?
Oh,
We got Sir.
Really? As like a guitar manufacturer, you mean?
Or guitar or amp manufacturer.
Oh.
I mean,
Oh,
they're
yeah.
just doing pedals. And again, we've talked about Fender, Gibson, Maestro, and Mesa Boogie.
Another smaller
Marshall.
one would be Exotic as well. Marshall.
Oh yeah. Exotic makes guitars. Yep. Mm-hmm.
PRS.
PRS.
I know they're new kids on the pedal block, but
yeah. And they were like another company that sort of made that evolutionary jump from like guitars to amplifiers, and that was kind of like something in the last 5 to 10 years that they've started to do. And then this year they moved into pedals. Where are you guys sort of in relationship to those pedals, the PRS pedals, and kind of how you feel like that fits into this mix of the Fender Gibson sort of zone?
As in, should they be on this list?
Well, should they be on this list, and like, how do you think that they can compare, in terms of their, or how do you sort of view the way that they're positioned in the marketplace? Like, certainly, I think with the Fender pedals, I think that arguably these were designed to sort of meet people in a budgetary, on a budgetary level. Like, they were inexpensive relative to what they did. And I'm not saying they were dirt cheap, because some of them, were upwards of $200 or $300 that had like a lot of features and maybe had multiple like channels to the pedals. But I think for the most part, they were maybe on the lower end of what was considered boutique. The Gibson Maestro pedals, I'm not sure what they ran for. Let me see.
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of curious what they.
Well, you know what they are in euros now.
Yeah, so it looks like they're mostly between 125 and 150. So yeah, they were, I would say, more on the budgetary line, and maybe like the low end of boutique. And I say low end of boutique because like a lot of the products that you can get that would have similar numbers of controls from Exotic could be in the 160 to 180. So these are maybe just slightly lower than that. I'm fairly certain that all the Maestro stuff was made overseas, but I could be wrong on that. So where do you kind of feel like the PRS is positioned? I mean, I think it's certainly on the high end. Most of their products were 250, something like that.
Yeah.
Where do you kind of see the PRS pedals in here?
I don't know really how to put words to this exactly. But when PRS announced their pedal line, my first thought was like, "Oh, interesting." Like it just felt a little left of field. It didn't. And again, this is I'm struggling to put words to it on why, but it just didn't quite line up to me. I don't know. It felt weird seeing PRS coming out with the pedal line, and then I went through the names of the pedals and the features and the price point. I'm like, there wasn't really much in me that, again, wanted to go out and purchase one. love PRS, love their guitars. You know, they come out with great products in that realm. But even still to this day, I still haven't played one of those pedals, and I don't know if that's going to change anytime soon. I'm not sure. It just didn't line up for me.
Got it. Brian, how did you feel? Yeah.
Yeah. I'm kind of along the same line of Grant. Being with this, like, with having them in the store and whatnot, like, we love PRS. You know, we have an entire floor dedicated to PRS, and they make great stuff. I think it was a little out of left field, out of the blue, to find out, like, it was even for us as a staff to find out that they were coming out with pedals. Like, oh wow, really? They are. And you know, I've actually haven't even played on one. We haven't been able to keep them in stock because people are buying them, which I guess, you know, may say something about it. It's hard to give an opinion on something that you haven't really like played on. From a builder standpoint, they're not as pedalboard friendly. I mean, they're big pedals. So some could say, oh, you know, that means you have more, you know, more space if you switch out pedals. But like a lot of these guys, I mean, I don't have one handy, but like a lot of these pedals like are not that size. So it's like you have to completely restructure your board just to fit it on there. So that was always like kind of like a moment. But I have yet to put one on a board. I've yet to have anyone ask me about it. But maybe it's because they're new, or maybe it's because they were all bought up. But yeah, I mean, we still love PRS though.
I will second or third that the guitars are really great. I have two. I have a DGT, and I also have a 513. They're very well made guitars, unquestionably. And I would also say that I wouldn't have anything bad to say about the quality of the pedals. I'm sure that they are excellent, just as the amplifiers that they build are very high quality and are of a similar standard that you would find the PRS guitars. You know, again, the tone for everybody of PRS or the feel or the look may not be for everybody, and there's certainly people that you know naysay PRSs and they think they look like furniture or whatever it is that they say. You know, that may be true, but I don't think that anybody can contest the quality of PRS and the level of consistency that they have.
Yeah.
So I think that's one thing that I think should be said. I think as it relates to pedals, I think sort of kind of, you know, looking at, you know, maybe intent behind it, maybe it is as genuine as this is just something that Paul and the PRS team have been wanting to explore for years, and it's finally come to fruition where they had this opportunity to, you know, design some pedals and, you know, release them to the public so that the sounds that have, you know, were rattling around in Paul's head as it relates to pedals can now be available to the public. Maybe a more pessimistic view, or a more maybe a little bit more skeptical view could look at it as maybe people have viewed and many people have talked about, you know, separate from any of us here, as it relates to maybe the Fender or the Gibson pedals, where the pedal market has turned into something where everybody wants to try to dip their toe in it, and this is a way, you know, to do it with, you know, or it's viewed as sort of low-hanging fruit, and I say low-hanging fruit for some of these companies like a Fender, Gibson, you know, PRS, in that the overhead is so low comparatively to what they're used to. Like if you're used to making hand-wired tube amps and the cost to you as a manufacturer is, you know, $1,500 or $2,000, and the overhead for a pedal is, you know, $50 to $100 depending on, you know, the features and where it's made. Undoubtedly, there seems to be a lot of appeal to make pedals because the overhead cost is very low. The price for entry is very low comparatively to other things that are in your product lineup, guitars or amplifiers or otherwise, in the case of, let's say, PRS, that it's an easy way to kind of cash in on the cachet and reputation that your brand has built, especially with somebody as reputable as PRS. I think that there are things that maybe validate that in the release, and there's things that maybe invalidate that. And again, I don't know the true intent. One thing that I can say that kind of goes along with what Brian has said is that it seems like there was definitely some sort of tone deafness, and that's no pun intended, as it relates to the pedals, to what the consumers are actually looking for. Because if you look at the size of Horse Meat, or you look at the size of Merry Cries, or you look at the size of Wind Through the Trees, relative to its competition and the things that it would be going up against, these are pedals that would have been oversized 10 years ago. Maybe 15 or 20 years ago, this would have been an acceptable pedal size for the normal consumer. But I think the ideas have shifted, the expectations have shifted, and most people that are buying pedals, when they buy a 2-knob compressor, are not expecting to get a Hammond 1590 BB size box for a single foot switch 2-knob compressor. Equally, for a 5-knob overdrive, they're again not expecting a 1590 BB size enclosure. It's just a lot larger than what you would find for an equivalent price Klon style, or I think he's characterized it as like, his Klon killer, so to speak. I could see in the Wind Through the Trees, which is like the flanger type thing, that could be harder, just given the knob layout that it has. It would be difficult to get that all to fit in a smaller enclosure. So I could see that one needing to be on the larger side. Maybe not as large as it is, but definitely larger than like a normal, sort of, again, the standard kind of being a Hammond 1590B, which is kind of like the size of a Phase 90 style enclosure. So it seems like there was maybe a miscalculation, or at least not listening to the feedback of the marketplace or the trends. And maybe he was like, I don't care about that, or I want to use, these types of components, and the only way for us to do that is to fit it into this style enclosure. Maybe that was what he was going for. I mean, I personally think that that's BS, as it relates to pedals or people that are using carbon comps and pedals and stuff like that. Like, it's just, that's voodoo hocus pocus stuff. It's not substantiated, in my opinion. But, and that's not to say that he's using that stuff. I don't know if he is or not, but there are people that will say, well, I only use large enclosures because I want to use all through hole stuff, or I want to hand wire a guitar pedal. Again, I don't think that these are hand wired. I'm pretty sure they're on PCB, but there is no benefit to hand wiring a guitar pedal. If anything, it will be less consistent and more variable unit to unit, and is not going to produce a better result. Again, I think just to sort of summarize this, there are some things about it that seem like, it's not really meeting the marketplace where it is at this point in time. The price points, I would say, are maybe a little high, given, again, what it is that they are and what they're doing and where people are going with this. And this is their maiden voyage into the pedal industry, and coming out, 25% higher than their competition of like pretty established brands that are making similar things. It seems like, I don't know, maybe overambitious might be the word. But where are you guys with this, as far as any other thoughts about the PRS pedals before maybe we move on to some of the other brands?
I think my only thing with the PRS pedals is, like, again, I'm fine if they want to get into the pedals, like, if they're a good product and well made and everything, which I'm sure, like you said, from PRS they would be. That's great. But
yeah,
it would have taken such little effort to, like, ask, I don't know, the top 5 guitar players, rig builders, people that use pedals all the time on compact boards, do some market research with their customers. Like, what are you after? Size would have come up so quickly.
Yeah.
Size isn't everything, but it is something. And
Right.
sometimes like you have companies like Moore that their whole line is in a finger enclosure. Like it's in the smallest possible enclosure you can do.
Right.
And they do like 3-4 knob layouts on these tiny little pedals.
Yeah.
And they sound great.
Yeah.
And so it is possible. And so I would be very curious to hear the thought process behind that. Obviously that's not something we have available today. But Paul, if you're listening, love your stuff. Just have questions. So yeah, I'm very curious about that, but I have no doubt they sound great. And if I plugged it in blindfolded, I'd be like, that's an awesome sounding pedal. I don't doubt that, but I just don't think practicality wise they would ever end up on my board just because of some of these things we're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, like nine times out of 10, when it comes down to fitting stuff on the boards, it's like it's always space. It's always about pedal, depending on the pedal. Oh, okay, well, I have this Chase Bliss Automatone. Okay, well, it's a big pedal. You're going to have to lose 2 pedal spots. Oh, yeah, no. I'll go get another pedal and then still add a pedal. Like that, I also agree. I think a big part, is sizing of enclosures, the orientation of it. I mean, heck, you got people even nowadays, they're like, man, I wish everything was top jacks. I think I was telling Brian Meter about that this morning driving in. I was like, some of these companies should come out with like top jack versions because they have side mount versions, which are great. But people are like, I want a top jack version. Well, why? Oh, because size means I can fit more stuff if I have pedals closer together. So yeah, I agree with you guys on that. I don't think I'll ever have those. I love the company. They're a great company. They make good amps and guitars and stuff. But for me, I just think the pedals are just they're a little too big for me. But
yeah. I think I think what you guys are saying, I think is really right on, and I think that Grant, I think touched on something as it relates to the PRS pedals that I think is I don't know it for a fact, but it seems like it's likely to be plausible in terms of just a little bit of market research or just talking to people in the industry that are doing this. This would have easily been revealed as one of the top 3 most important factors as it relates to guitar pedals. And I think it could speak to that, they just want a differentiator, or they were viewing these as more studio tools, and they were just like, well, people aren't going to be putting these on a pedal board. They're just going to be using them as individual pieces, and that's it. Maybe that was the thinking. Or it could be that, a lot of the really established and really well-known pedal, or I should say industry sort of titans, and I think Paul Reed Smith is among them as far as individuals that have a lot of clout and respect and have been revered by many people for a really long time. They can be sort of siloed, and they don't get a lot of friction in their worlds. And so when they have an idea or they have a product that they want to launch, that there aren't a lot of people that will, sort of be a backstop to, wherever they want their creativity to go to. And so it could also be that, they nobody wanted to say no or to try to control it. And I think another evidentiary piece of this could be like, look at the names. And that's not to say that,
confused.
You couldn't have a pedal called Horse Meat or Mary Cries or Wind Through the Trees. Certainly, we're at liberty to do those things and name them whatever we want. I'm just wondering, why stack the deck in your like against yourself by using names like this? Like it doesn't seem to come from a place of like trying to get the most people in the door. And I can't see why that wouldn't be your intent if this is your first sort of, step into this particular part of the industry. So I don't know. Part of me thinks that maybe there wasn't a lot of feedback and not a lot of questions that were being asked as some of these products were being developed. And that's evidentiary from the naming, the size, and maybe some things that I think would have been easily disrupted and corrected if there had been maybe more questions asked. I want to continue talking about this, but I want to break again to mention a few of our sponsors. And again, by supporting our sponsors, you are in turn supporting us. And these next two sponsors are offering coupon codes and discounts for Chairman of the Board's listeners. So I first want to talk about our friends over at Mono. And if you're not familiar with Mono, my first question is, where have you been these last, 20 years?
Amen.
They are at the sort of the zeitgeist. They're at the top of the game as far as gig bags and cases. They've also got pedal boards and accessories now that they make that are all excellent quality. I personally use their double gig bag all the time so that I can transport either my Les Paul or my 335 and my Strat or my Tele in one consolidated gig bag. So I can just grab that gig bag, grab my amp, I grab my pedal board, and it is the most streamlined way for me to be able to get all my gear packed up and get it from point A to point B. I really, really love their stuff. And Chairman of the Board's listeners get a 10% off coupon using the discount code Chairman at checkout. You can enter that code and redeem it for 10% off anything on the Mono website, and that's monocreators.com. And again, the coupon code is Chairman for 10% off. Also, another company that makes the show possible every single week are friends over at Pedal Genie. And Pedal Genie is like the Netflix of pedals. And I'm talking about old school Netflix, when you used to have to select what movies, which DVDs, which Blu-rays you wanted on the Netflix website. You would add those to your cart, and then Netflix would ship you out those DVDs. When you were done with them, you'd send them back to Netflix, and then they would send you the other DVDs that were on your list, and that would just continue to go on cyclically as you continue to add more movies to your list. This is not with movies, however. Pedal Genie is doing this with pedals. So you create a stockpile of all the pedals that you're interested in trying out. You add this to your list. Pedal Genie will send those pedals to you. You can experiment with them through your own gear, try them out, send them back, and they will send you more pedals that are on your list that you've curated so that you can continue to try out new stuff. And you don't have to risk buying it or dealing with returns or paying any sort of restocking fees. This is a really easy way to always try out the coolest, newest, latest, and greatest stuff without the consequence of having to worry about any sort of return fees or issues and getting your money back should you not like a pedal. This is a really cool way to experiment, to try out new stuff. And listeners of the Chairman of the Board's podcast get 50% off their first month, and they have several different tiers that you can check out depending on how many pedals that you want to get. And the discount code is BOARD, B-O-A-R-D. You can use that at checkout. You get 50% off your first month, no matter which tier you decide to select. And again, the tiers just determine how many pedals you get to check out at one time. So definitely check out our friends over at Pedal Genie. So guys, we talked a little bit about the PRS pedals. I want to talk about, you guys mentioned Sir a little earlier, and Sir, of course, is not on the sort of the size level of a Gibson or a Fender. I don't know. I would imagine they're still smaller than a PRS. But I have to say that I don't view Sir in quite the same way as these other companies. I feel like Sir is very thoughtful about the products that they make. And I feel like, and that's not to say that these companies are not thoughtful, but I feel like I don't know, for some reason, the vibe I get from Sir is that it's very strategic. Their releases, like they don't have a lot of pedals, but I would say that their pedals have had quite a bit of longevity for the most part. Like you still see the Riot used by a lot of people. You still see stuff like their Shiba Overdrive is still used by a lot of people. The Coco Boost is still used by a lot of people, especially on the professional side, like studio musicians, touring musicians. There's a lot of stuff that is still used. Their buffers are still in production. They're very good and high quality buffers. Their line out box, they're one of the only companies that make a production line out box. at all. They have a lot of really good products, but they don't make a lot of products. They came out with their delay maybe a year or so ago. I don't know what the production of that is. I actually haven't tried one of those delays in since it came out. I had seen one initially when they had released, but it doesn't seem like they release a ton of pedals. They maybe release 1 or 2 pedals a year. It seems to be very sparse. Again, they're also making amplifiers, which are revered at the highest quality, as are their instruments. I kind of view Shure as being like a little bit different, and maybe, I don't know, like I have a lot of respect for the way that they operate and do things as it relates to their pedal brands. It seems like they still invest a lot in their pedals, and they're not just trying to saturate the market with one of everything. They are trying to address pedals as tools, and they're positioning them in the marketplace. I think to fairly and accurately represent what they are and compete against stuff that and I think outperform a lot of the stuff that they're competing against, in my opinion. How are you guys seeing Shure in kind of this lineup of guitar manufacturers and amp manufacturers that make pedals?
You want to go, Brian?
Yeah. So we carry them, obviously. We carry the guitars, we carry the amps, both quality products. Their pedals, also another great product. I don't have a lot of experience, like personally on a board, like my own board. I see them coming on setups and stuff. And the cool thing about it is that, they have thought about the size of the pedal. Yeah. They have thought about the function of the pedal. They don't have some random, it takes 19.5 voltage, reverse polarity, all this, like a big barrel. Like they have made it as possible as using a pedal power 3, plugging in the pedal. Like some of these companies, you'll get, they'll put this crazy type of connector on it, and it's just, it makes the whole, like, I wanted to try this out experience really difficult. So, then the cool thing is I have learned this over time of just kind of seeing them, is that like some of their pedals, like, it's not a triple pole switch, but it's not like a soft switch. I don't know what kind of switch they're using, but it does like a double function.
Yeah, they're doing like a Carling, just a regular, Carling. I guess it's just a momentary switch, but it's got like a pretty heavy duty action on it, and yes. it's just like what you would find in Strymon or but it's just a different feel. Like a lot of the old school guys, like a lot of the old Bradshaw stuff, had those same Carling switches. And John Suhr used to work for and with Robert Bradshaw in the 90s. And I don't know if that was the reason that he chose this switch, but that switch has a very specific feel. It's got a really like kind of hard action, a really fast return, and it's like way more heavy duty feeling than a Strymon foot switch, for example, or a Chase Bliss switch.
And it's great. I think it's awesome. I think that's something that you can separate, because there's there's people I've talked to. Even when I talked to Andy Timmons, I was like, oh, why did you come out with this different type of version of this pedal? I didn't like how that switch sounded. It's the same thing. Like, I didn't like how that foot switch felt on some things, but, it's a really cool quality design. I think some of their pedals, you can hold down the switch and it'll actually access like an extra mode. I can't remember which one it is.
I think they have a boost pedal that is their dual boost. I think if you hold it down, it gives you like the second channel of the boost, because you have like 2 different boost settings.
Yeah, and some of them, which is really smart, and it's kind of like the route like Jay just took with the red remote, is I think on some of their models they have like a TRS jack on the back. You can actually do like channel switching through it or engage us, which is really smart, because that's the adaptability of some companies with switchers. Like, hey, I got this new cool product. Okay, well, how can I switch that mode with my switcher? Oh, shoot, I can't. So they've done a really great job, designing it around those aspects. And that's always a good thing that companies should do, is they should ask musicians. You should ask pedal makers, or not pedal rig builders. But their delay is also awesome. we can't keep them in stock. And I know the big thing is about like chip shortage and stuff. That's why they were delayed for so long. The delay was delayed. How funny was that?
Super long delay.
All right, it's super long.
2-month delay. Talk about repeats.
I remember when I first started here, I like, when you're in the interview and you make casual conversation. So I asked the manager, I'm like, so what kind of delay do you use? Thinking he'll be like, oh yeah, I use this, analog or something. He goes, oh, for a long delay, I use a 30-foot cable. And for a short delay, I use a 15-foot instrument cable. And I was like, oh, wow. So like, funny delay joke. But yeah, no, I would say that, they really put the process into it. The discovery delay is really cool looking. It's not like everyone else's stuff. Like it has its own look to it.
Yes.
But yeah, it's cool. Sounds good to me. I kind of wish it was stereo, but that's just me.
That's pretty impressive. The discovery and their pedal line in general. And again, sorry guys, struggling with it might just be English in general today or finding my vocabulary, but I again struggle to put words to it of why Sir makes more sense than PRS to come up with a pedal line. Like not even talking about what they've released. Like just if I was to be told like PRS is coming out with a pedal line versus Sir is coming out with a pedal line, Sir makes more logical sense to me, but I can't really put the words to it. They both, if I was to say, if someone was to ask which one makes better quality guitars, man, they're both incredible. They're well built. They don't rush the process. They're not trying to just cut to the bottom line. Like they put thought and care into their product. But Sir just makes sense for guitar pedals. I don't know if it's because they came with a reactive load first, and that's kind of a little bit of a step in that direction, or what it is. But they do great stuff, and it makes sense. I would say Sir pedals I do not see on builds that often. Like it's pretty rare I'll see a Sir pedal on a build. But even still, I mean, they're great pedals. They did a great job with them, and I'm really impressed by them.
Yeah. I think that they seem to appeal more to, I think, again, like studio guys, session guys, and that's a lot of who Sir has built the brand around. Guys like a Scott Henderson or a Michael Landau or a Pete Thorne. Is kind of maybe the in the social media space, kind of the guy that kind of helps like shape the brand. My understanding is that the pedal side is kind of been turned over to his son. I think some of the initial stuff was partially Sir. There was also another guy I think that did design work there named Bob, not Bob Bradshaw. And I think he kind of helped develop with John the early pedals that were like the Riot, the Sheba, the Coco Boost. Those are kind of like, those have been around for, I don't know, 15 years, maybe a little more, a little less. And then I think in the last couple of years that now that his son, who I believe, I forget his name, but
Mr. Sir.
I think he went to college to become an electrical engineer, like, studied this stuff, obviously had the influence and the resources of his dad having a company that was, specifically invested in, guitar related products and amplifiers and things like that. And then I think now that he's finished with his electrical engineering degree, he's now working for Sir as, their kind of development guy for a lot of the pedals. And I think that Discovery was I don't think it was his first product. I think he was involved with like the reactive load or some of the products that are around that. But I think that this is one of the first pedals that he's kind of done that implements, kind of maybe like the more advanced implementation of, things that maybe were outside of the wheelhouse of what, John on his own could execute, or maybe he could, but I think that his son certainly seems to have like a real interest in maybe some of the more, technical stuff. I feel like the Discovery almost like bridges the gap between like where, like maybe like a more user-friendly Chase Bliss style delay in a way. Like it's got a lot of controls, it's got a lot of knobs, it's got MIDI, but it seems like it is also fairly accessible to, somebody who is maybe not as comfortable with the 10 dip switches on the back of a Chase Bliss pedal or something like that. And certainly this would compete with like a tonal recall or something like that. It's got a digital display. It's got some cool features to it. So I feel like the Sur pedals I don't really categorize in the same way that I would like a Fender or a Gibson by way of Maestro. I even think in some ways like Boogie was like a little bit different. Like obviously the acquisition of Boogie is sort of like a newer thing with Gibson, and so I think that most of their pedals seem to be primarily based in like the distortion, overdrive, boost category, and I think some of them were inspired by the amp sounds that they might have been getting. I think others of them were kind of like, just stuff that they thought were cool. And Mesa, I guess, did have some pedals back in the 90s. They had a giant pedal called the V-Twin, which was like had like the diamond pattern, like metal, it was kind of hideous and it was huge, but apparently they sounded really good. And so I guess they did have some pedals that had come out previously. I think that the buffer and accessory stuff, that was like a separate designer. That was all Mario from Axis Electronics that designed like a lot of the buffer related stuff and kind of signal conditioning and like amplifier switching stuff and some of the MIDI stuff. And then I don't really know who did the pedal designs in-house, like the Flux Drive and, some of the other stuff that they had. I don't think it was Mario. I think it was somebody else that either, did amp design or something like that. But they don't seem to be coming out with much in terms of pedals, and I wonder if Gibson just kind of maybe put a freeze on any sort of development stuff that they had that was related to pedals. But I would say that they all are built fairly well. I have a few of them here because I know some of the guys that are at Mesa Boogie, and so we've done some pedal trades and stuff like that over the years, and I've always thought that they sounded pretty good. None of them made it onto my board, but it was more just like a taste thing. It wasn't like these things suck or they were not the right size. Like, they seem to take into consideration the things that might be important, like normal pedal sizes, normal pedal functions, nothing sort of out of the ordinary. Also not like challenging people in any way, but I think, from a Mesa Boogie user standpoint, I had probably met their customers where they were, So, anything else that we want to touch on? I mean, we talked about Sur, we talked about Fender, Gibson, Maestro, Boogie. One other company that we didn't talk about that's kind of in this vein is Marshall, and they haven't really released any pedals in a long time. You could make an argument to say that of any of these companies that we mentioned, the Sur, Fender, Gibson, PRS, they actually probably have pedals that are the most memorable of any big box company like that. And I'm speaking specifically about the Governor, which has become a, sort of one of the most common replicated pedals that's ever been made as far as it relates to sort of distortion, plexi style sound. Many pedals are derivative of the Marshall Governor. And I think secondly, the Marshall Bluesbreaker, which, again, there is no King of Tone, there's no Prince of Tone, there's no Duke of Tone, there's no JHS Morning Glory without the Bluesbreaker. And so what do we think about Marshall?
I don't think, when I think Marshall, I don't think guitar pedals.
Yeah.
I think the guitar amp, the iconic sound. But at the same time, the Bluesbreaker it's just one of those circuits. It's the circuit that gets copied. A lot of people, whether they know it or not, are going to have a Tube Screamer, a Klon, and a Bluesbreaker on their board that's been repackaged by another company.
Yeah.
And so it's just, as far as bringing something, to go back on what I said at the beginning of the podcast, bringing something innovative to market, there it is. They've done it. And so I think that's huge, and for any company, almost impossible to do, especially these days, bringing something truly innovative to market. So very impressive. And whether or not they'll dip back in there and continue that in the future, who knows? But
well, they did try. They did try to make like a V2 of a lot of these classics, probably 20 years ago.
The 2010s? Oh, okay, even earlier.
Yeah,
than
maybe
that.
20. Yeah, okay. It was like 2000s, maybe 20. I don't know if he was in 2010s. It was like, I think it was like the 2000s. They had like kind of some silver, those. Smaller box versions.
They're pretty ugly.
Yeah, they weren't attractive, and they didn't really sound the same either, and so I think people weren't attracted to it. But I mean, even the Governor and the Bluesbreaker, I wouldn't say that they were particularly great in terms of the quality. Like the jacks are kind of crappy. The first versions were made in the UK, but I wouldn't say that the quality was necessarily any better. They used kind of like these really crappy like plastic jacks, and that's like a common thing that breaks on them all the time. The foot switches really weren't that good. But they had a unique look, and probably by today's standards, if they were to come out, it wouldn't be that impressive, But at that time, there wasn't as much competition in the pedal world, and they kind of created two fairly iconic circuits that are again copied routinely and are kind of the gold standards for distortion with the Governor and overdrive with the Bluesbreaker. Which is interesting that they haven't been able to replicate it, and they haven't really tried to step back into the pedal world, even though they've created some of these real icons. I mean, I would think an easy low-hanging fruit for them would just be to re-release exact replicas in the same enclosures of those pedals. That would be easy low-hanging fruit that people would go for right away, because both these pedals on Reverb are $800, something like that.
Yeah, wow.
Thoughts, Brian, on Marshall?
So it's funny, as you guys are talking, I'm sitting here like, I didn't know that Marshall had had pedals. Like that's like, it's just been so long, but I actually had a couple of those pedals back when I first started.
You had a Shredmaster?
I had, I don't know which one I had. I'm pretty sure I had the Bluesbreaker on. I really don't know what I had. It was so long ago. But I do remember having it. And I think it was probably at that time that I just, didn't really know much about guitar stuff. But yeah, no, I agree with you guys. I think if they would have come back, personally, if they were to come back and do one, it would be cool to see what kind of updates they would do. But it would also be a bad time because there's an oversaturation of pretty much everything in the market right now. So I don't know, it would kind of depend, but yeah, I don't have much input on this one just because I forgot about them. I forgot they were a thing.
Yeah. Well, unquestionably, of all the big box companies, I would say that Marshall seemed to, hit the nail on the head. Now, the historical context of this, I don't actually remember because I wasn't really, when these came out, I was probably like 5 or 6 years old. And I don't even know if in the moment when they came out that they were considered as cool of products. Like, I don't know if when it released, how the Governor was received or how the Bluesbreaker was received. I don't think that they were that expensive relative to other stuff that was out there, is my understanding. I want to talk about one more company, though, which we haven't talked about yet, which is Ibanez. Or Ibanez, depending on who you ask. But before we do that, I want to talk about two more sponsors that make the show possible every week. One of them is our friends over at Bestronix. And if you are watching the three of us right now, we are all likely getting some of our building products, if not all of our building products, from our friends over at Bestronix. They are the American distributor for square plugs, and those are plugs that I use routinely for many of the personal rigs that I build. And also, they make great cables. They have a great in-house brand that is absolutely amazing. They also have amazing, accessories, whether you want to buy your dual lock there, whether you want to buy your 2.1 millimeter barrel connectors for DC there. They have it all. And listeners can get 10% off using the coupon code Dachairs, 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 and you get 10% off any of the goods that you want from their website. Secondly, our friends over at Creation Music Company make amazing products as well. And if you've seen any of Brian's beautiful pedalboard builds, including one of his latest that he's done for our mutual friend Bradford Mitchell over at Worship Tutorials, he has used exclusively the Creation plugs, their mini cakes and their little shorties. They have absolutely great products in addition to pedal boards and accessories. Really, really great stuff. And if you're interested in checking them out, you can get 15% off anything in their store using the coupon code Chairmen15 at checkout. Again, 15% off any of the stuff on their store, and that's creationmusiccompany.com. All right, so let's get back to Ibanez. What do we think about Ibanez? Because I guess it does go against what I said. Like I said, the Bluesbreaker and the Governor were, did it best of any companies. We did negate Ibanez because I think that they actually did it better than anybody. Because if we think about how many iconic pedals have come out of there, whether it's the Tube Screamer, whether it's the Mostortion, there's so many different devices that have come out of there. What do you guys think about Ibanez?
I don't actually know. I don't know the history of Ibanez well enough to know, timing of events on, when they even started making their first products. I know they've been around for ages, but if I was just to take them as a company that makes, let's say, guitars primarily, and then got into the pedal world at some point, even if you just took them as a pedal company only, who's doing it better than Ibanez as far as track record goes? It's just incredibly impressive, not expensive. They're actually quite well priced, incredibly impressive. And their flagship product as far as pedals go, if you were to take it as the TS9, who can keep a pedal in production for how long now? 30, 40 years? How long has the TS9 been around? It's impressive. And again, well built. A TS9 is a TS9. I would struggle to find a guitar player that uses overdrive that doesn't have a TS9 clone on their board. Probably more than any other clone of a pedal out there. A TS9 is going to, be the one that shows up most commonly. I don't really know what else to say. I think it's incredibly impressive. I would love to be able to do the same thing. I just don't have the skills.
I don't think do they have many versions of the TS9? I don't know how many I've seen them. Come on
there's just the TS9. I guess there's been there's been reissues over time, but I think it's still called the TS9. And then there's been several different derivatives of the Tube Screamer, even within Ibanez. Whether you're talking about the TS9, TS808. TS10, the Sound Tank era. They have the newer hand-wired version. They've had the TS9 Turbo or something like that, Turbo Tube Screamer. So there's been just a plethora of different eras of Tube Screamer. They have the Tube Screamer Mini, but that's kind of again, this is probably the most. It's probably the most popular overdrive ever made.
Oh yeah.
And it's made by a guitar company. And I would say, Ibanez, how could we forget? How could I be so foolish as to forget about Ibanez? And I'm trying to think of what else, kind of falls into the category of classic effects that they made. Their chorus, was used by a lot of people famously, like John Scofield. Their analog delay was also, used by a lot of people famously. Let's see. I'm trying to think of what else. I actually did a video on the Ibanez pedals, maybe, I don't know, a year or two ago. And another great one. It's not necessarily, I would say, super popular, but it has become a cult classic, is the the Ibanez Echo machine, the EM5 is kind of like a tape echo delay style. The Mostortion, the MT10, that's a great one. You have a delay there.
EL10. So I have this for a client's board. I don't know if my camera's gonna actually focus on it.
Yeah, I see it.
But
the blue delay from the the 10 series.
I don't know why, but like I really dig this enclosure. I don't know. There's something about it. It's just I remember that I had one back there. But yeah, this is another one.
The other one is the wah, the Ibanez WH10, which is used by like John Frusciante. It's like a really interesting, unique wah circuit. That's also another like, top 5 best wahs ever made. 89, one of the best analog delays, certainly one of the earliest analog delays out there, along with the Boss DM2. You have the TS8, TS9, TS10. Those are all, are all pretty. I think at the time maybe the TS10 was not viewed so favorably, but now with John Mayer having used it, I think it's become certainly more popular. But still, the TS8 or the TS808 and TS9 are unquestionably some of the best-selling pedals of all time. Mostortion is like the Nashville standard for distortion pedals, probably has been for the last 10 years. Those are super popular, very expensive, like $600 to $800 if you can find them.
What's one of the most interesting things about Ibanez as well, which again is a credit to how did they do this? If you look at their clientele for guitars, and then you think about their clientele for pedals, as in guitars typically lean more towards the metal, heavier side.
Yeah.
Like what other brand has been able to do that? That's their typical clientele. Yeah. And pedals, everyone across the industry uses Ibanez pedals in one form or another. Whether they, and probably typically less metal guitar players, as far as you think of the TS9, an analog delay, the chorus, like it lends itself to another kind of area of the industry. It's just very impressive because I would never look to Jackson guitars for my next guitar pedal. It's just not going to happen. Like they have their clientele. I am not one of them. I know I look like a metalhead, but I'm not that guy. And so even just that, like I know their Ibanez guitars are much more than just metal, but they lend themselves in that direction. But they've been able to break into not only a new area and done it unbelievably well, but they've been able to break into a new section or clientele in the industry that may not want to buy their guitars, but would absolutely use and praise their guitar pedals. So how they've done that, I have no idea, but it's very impressive.
Yeah, I would agree. And again, I'm a bit embarrassed, I have to admit, that I didn't think about them when we started to think about all these different companies. Like, because I guess I associate Ibanez so much with their pedals more than their guitars. Like, I've never owned an Ibanez guitar, and I think it's probably a product of the fact that like I don't play like Joe Satriani style music or Steve Vai style music. And I think that actually Ibanez has made a lot of strides and inroads to try to differentiate, their the players that use their instruments. Like they have like a Josh Smith signature. I said it so Brian doesn't have to.
Thank you.
And they have a Larry Basilio and they've had some kind of signature models that are in sort of dissimilar style, guitar style players that are different than sort of what was their meat and potatoes for a long time. But this has turned out to be a very interesting conversation. Certainly I'm really interested to hear what the feedback is of people in the chat and in the comments section as it relates to this topic of discussion and where they think, maybe our summarizations are off or maybe need more context and where they may agree with some of these findings. I'm really curious to hear from you. And also, if you're finding these topics of conversation interesting, I highly recommend that you write us a review on iTunes. We have, I think, a few hundred. I think our average is still a 5-star review. We have a lot of high quality reviews, and that's not to say that you can't give us a bad review. Reviews are helpful as long as they're thoughtful and honest. And so I encourage you to do a review for us on iTunes, and that really goes a long way in helping more people find out about the podcast. And we continue to grow every month, so we appreciate everybody's listening and viewing wherever it is that you are finding the podcast, whether it be on YouTube or iTunes or Spotify or Audible. So thank you for listening. And again, if you're willing to write us a review on iTunes, that is one of the most helpful locations in order to, again, promote and propagate our listenership every single month. Gentlemen, any final words before we complete for today?
I have, speaking to our listeners, I have one legitimate request here.
All right.
If anyone, that I've always wondered, it's about the PRS pedal line that we chatted about. If anyone does know or has heard an interview with Paul that talks through the thought process of why the pedals are named the way they are, I am so curious, because they scream inside joke or backstory or something. Like there has to be a bigger reason, and I really want to know. So other than that, I love to chat today. Would love to know if you guys know in the comments why the names, what's the story, because I just have to know it. But yeah, thanks for listening, guys, and thanks for joining the conversation. Brian, do you have anything else to finish off with?
I mean, I would just say, yeah, if maybe you guys think we missed a company that is an amp, I mean, not, we did bigger name ones that we could think of, and obviously there are smaller companies that have also done it too, but I mean, drop a comment, a link of the company, just let us know, and I would love to check them out. I'm always liking to find new gear stuff. So thanks for listening and watching.
Absolutely. All right. Until next time.
All right.
We will see you on the road to Tonetown.
See you guys.
See ya.